Hello, hello, everyone.
Hello.
We
I say
are,
good morning, but it's not morning. Now it's
that's right.
afternoon.
It's good morning, it's afternoon, and a lot of different time zones. How is
Yep.
everybody doing today? We are so excited to be doing this live stream today and so grateful that Ellen is joining us to give us some insights. So, we have a very short period of time that we have Ellen with us to ask her a ton of questions that we have gotten from our audience. So we just want to jump right in. So first, I want to introduce to you guys Ellen, who is a senior editor of residential at The Real Deal, which is a leading publication that serves as the definitive source for insights into the real estate industry. She has a focus and The Real Deal has a focus on development, politics, and technology. And they highlight key sectors, key players in the industry, groundbreaking projects across the United States. Ellen, she spearheads the coverage of the residential market and brokerages, coordinating with reporters from New York to South Florida and from Chicago to Texas to California. Ellen's team delivers in-depth analysis on national stories, as well as critical developments in local markets, ensuring readers are well informed about the dynamic landscapes of real estate, which is why we are here today. She and her team have extensively covered the NAR settlement and all that has been happening with that. So, Ellen, thank you so much for being here and for helping our audience understand what is going on today.
Thank you for the introduction. Selfishly, I'm kind of glad this is what everyone's talking about now. We've been staring down the pike for about a year, trying to figure out the best way to get into this story, and that the news makes itself. So I'd say welcome everybody to what my notes have looked like for a couple months now, but happy to break down whatever sounds good. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we are so glad that you actually just disclosed that you've been talking about this for a year, because before we went live, we had a quick conversation about how there's so many people out there that are talking and sharing surface information, but you guys have really been studying this in depth and have been involved in this in depth for, as you just said, over a year. So our first question, if we can start with you just giving us the latest updates about the recent settlement, the commission structures, and maybe some things that people don't know that they should know.
Sure. So I'll keep it relatively recent history. But this all goes back to a case that went to trial in October, actually, and a guilty verdict that landed around Halloween. So think back a couple months. That was the first time we had a case and a trial that ended up with a jury saying that the National Association of Realtors was at the center of inflating commissions by way of its participation rules, which has long guided that an offer of commission or compensation, from a listing broker out to a buyer's broker. So it really centers on that one rule. And that's what you have to keep in mind. So this was our first tangible decision on that's saying that had shaped the industry beyond its appropriate reach and kept commissions at an all-time high. NAR, it's also important to note, that was central to their argument that they had never directly shaped commissions, but the rule had kind of given way to this culture. So that's kind of the center of the argument. That's how the jury came out, and that's what set all this off. So the most recent announcement is that NAR reached a deal after saying that they would appeal and fight this. I think it made the most sense eventually, as just this wave of copycat suits came up. So it's important to know that that's sort of the order that things happened, was that this verdict landed, and then dozens of copycat suits that were centered on the exact same rule popped up in markets across the country. And at that point, I think it was just a little too much to fight. NAR reached this deal, and it included most of its members. And there's kind of a cutoff for brokerages that could buy into it, which is sort of a special perk. But they were kind of that central party that finally kind of caved and agreed to a rule change, which has not only drawn the attention of home sellers in this case, but home buyers and the Department of Justice. So this was a big move for them even changing the rule. It's important to note this only counts for for the cases that are brought by home sellers, not home buyers or by the Department of Justice, which remains to be seen. But still, even with that fraction, it's still a huge deal that they acknowledge this and shifted the language to ban commission offers from all of their owned MLSs and from member MLSs. Excuse me. So that's major. What we don't know is probably more than we do know at this point. So everyone's left with a lot of questions, which I understand, and we've been hearing a lot. So the rules go into effect in July. And right now there's kind of an open window for what you can offer for commissions. So there's a little bit of wiggle room. So what I would say to note is that the rule changing is significant. What we don't know is how that ripple effect could could play into factors like home prices, your day-to-day business, and how MLSs offer you business. Things we call the platform wars, which is more of a prop tech sector word. But so that's kind of the state of play. We have 4 total brokerages, which are some of the biggest names. Compass is the most recent, which settled for $58 million. That's huge because they're the largest player that was excluded from this deal. It would have been prohibitively expensive, more than $500 million for them to buy into NAR settlement and to get cleared on all those home seller fronts. So they cut their own deal, $58 million, now they're out. And it's interesting that this is still centered on NAR's rule. So any member is included in a lawsuit because they're a member of NAR. So I think the other thing to take away is how people are now reevaluating their relationship with NAR and who could be pulling back from that in addition to cutting deals. So that's a little bit of a primer. I don't know if there's anything there I can pull more on, but right now I think we're waiting on the edge to see who else bites into these settlements and how that is going to take a huge chunk out of brokerage earnings, I think, in the next year. So that's that state of play. And then on the individual broker front, how people are kind of getting ready for these rules to change. We've already seen offers like flat fees, kind of new menus of offerings. People are experimenting with that. I think it's been a banner week for real estate influencers who are trying to coach people through this. Excuse me, I hear a dog. But yeah, so it's a lot going on, a lot of questions. These touch on the mortgage space as well. But I think the overarching message is that we're going to have to wait and see. And it's just best to be prepared.
Preparation is going to be so important with all of this going on, like being educated yourself, but also being able to educate your clients as well through all of this. So the decision is made. How do you see this changing and impacting the relationship between the buyers and the agents and with their ability to actually afford to pay a commission? Like, how do you see that adjusting?
Right. So there's just going to be, I think the biggest thing is that it's not that negotiation is new. It's that the buyer being involved in negotiation from the get-go is going to be new. So you're going to have these conversations a lot earlier. And I think really, if I was an agent trying to take advantage of those established relationships that I had, would do me well. I know it's not an option for everybody. But I think it's really going to be about breaking down every part of the process right up front and seeing what's available. I can't speak to like exact pricing or anything like that, but I think it's just going to be that conversation coming out ahead and kind of laying out everything that happens within the process before even showing a house at this point. I mean, that's how upfront we're talking now. So I just see it as kind of a rearranging of conversations. I think where the payment actually ends up landing burden-wise, we know it's off the seller officially, but I think it's still very up in the air and comes down to an individual deal. If you're communicating, if you're going through financing and that's a part of your services and you want to maintain offering that, that's just going to be a conversation that I imagine happens a little bit earlier.
Yeah, we could unpack a lot of that and take a lot of time to unpack a lot of those specific, subtopics when it comes to commissions. And we were also talking about, Carys and I were talking about lenders and lenders' policies. And you even mentioned that a little bit earlier about them and how those relationships are starting to possibly shift and change. And so their policies are against financing buyer agent fees. What solutions are you guys seeing or hearing about from that sector that are emerging moving forward that you think might be happening?
So we're already seeing official support for dual licensing of loan officers, which is interesting. The president and CEO said shortly after the settlement that he would encourage that to kind of put loan and lenders in more of the buyer seat, which is interesting. So I think it's at this point, it feels like everyone's kind of scrambling to get their business in order, if that's any comfort. But I think it's a little bit more active outreach from loan operators. And they have a vested interest, even startups like a Rocket Mortgage or a Loan Depot, not startups, but in the tech space, they still have a vested interest to really back their brokers and keep those relationships alive, because if that stream of business is threatened, then so are they. But I'd say it's interesting. We're seeing kind of that official endorsement already for loan operators to be dipping into the broker end of things. So I think dual licensing is going to be kind of a new wave for us this year.
That's going to be interesting.
That is going to be very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with all of the potential implications, where do you see there being risk of possible steering, and also with VA loans as well? Because I know there's a lot of people have been saying like VA buyers are going to be impacted heavily with this.
Right. I can say that, that really remains to be seen, but there's already been a push from obviously industry groups to get legislation rolling on shifting the rules around VA loans, which are currently, I think, flat out banned from touching on compensation without really special permission. So I'd say there's already action on the lobbying front, and they've seen this coming down the pike. I know that at least one industry group has been in touch with the DOJ since the settlement. And the DOJ has been interested in commissions for several years now. So I think there's the structure for that. This just kind of kicked in. So I imagine we'll see change around that, because there's already such pressure for housing affordability. And I'm not totally convinced that housing prices are going to change radically, but it does hit you harder on an individual level when you're having to dole out a little bit more. So I can say there's already been kind of official movement. We're looking for pushing on Congress a little bit more for rule changes, but TBD, unfortunately.
Yep. I feel like a lot of it is going to be like that. It's just like, as it goes, everyone's going to figure it out.
That's the unfortunate part. It's a lot of people have taken notice and they're worried about it, but they're kind of have to see what happens. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting when you're talking about affordable housing, because there are a lot of, I've heard of a lot of real estate agents going on social media and talking about how this will not affect home prices. But if housing is unaffordable, then that affects home prices. So I think there's a bit of a conundrum there when it comes to having more of those fees falling on the buyer. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that is going to be a huge opportunity for education, maybe, if you're breaking down those offerings and what the process is. I'd say it's difficult because it's kind of two layers. It's housing affordability at large. The market is already so tight. We've struggled with inventory, and development is sometimes not where we need it to be, depending on the market. And then it's on that individual level where you're a buyer. First-time buyers are a key example of, what everyone thought of, I think, of right after this deal landed. It's going to hit you harder, and you have less education and less leverage going in. So I think that can come down to kind of the individual broker level, is just kind of making that clear. And it's just going to be more about kind of examining those pieces of the process. And we'll see also, I expect more developments as far as incentive programs and those kind of relationships out of those lender products and things like that. So I expect that between now and July, we're going to see a lot of new offerings springing up, actually, that are targeting both brokers and buyers to just be a little more open book, and kind of make you feel a little more on the driver's seat negotiations wise and picking up those perks.
For sure. Now, I have a question in regards to the MLS, because at the end of the day, the MLS is really there to show what that compensation is. Most of the other information you can get on third-party websites, right? So where do you see these third-party websites having, their hand in the pot with all of this? Realtor.com, Zillow, Trulia, all of that. And do you see a move away from the MLS? Do you think there's going to be like a new kind of tech something that's going to come in and take away, the MLS and all of that? Like, where do you see that going?
Sure. So I think the rule change was a huge, I don't want to say hit, but it definitely a shift for the MLS, because remember, the settlement only applies to NAR and its owned MLSs. So it can talk for its programs and not for aggregators. So for things like a Zillow or, individual broker websites, I think that's actually going to really empower them because you can have that detail on that platform. The difficulty for an offering like Zillow or Zillow as a company is that they do rely on broker business. So that kind of threatens their strength. But I think the key shift here that we know for certain is after the settlement, people are really questioning the value of the overall MLS and how that's going to change. Because I think if you're a broker and you can offer that on your own website for your own listings, I'm curious what your relationship with that would be. So it's a definite shift that we've never seen before in them cleaning that off the MLS. And I think other sites stand to gain from it, but it just will be a while to see that. And it's worth noting, Zillow is by far the biggest name in the space. I want to say it's 2 or 3 times the traffic of the second competitor. But that kind of threat from broker business, it's so heavily invested in that they've seen that coming down the pike. I think they said in fourth quarter earnings that they are aware of the threat. They don't enforce long-term contracts and people can leave whenever they want. So that's something they're already eyeing, and they're trying to diversify their revenue stream. So that's a little bit of a red flag. If you're an investor, you probably noticed in the day after that Zillow is not doing so hot. So that's kind of a good read for the gut reaction. I think they could probably make it up with, even just having that compensation and keeping that standard on their platform. But it should be interesting to see how that state of play changes with people turning away possibly from the MLS. Zillow's remaining the same, but they're clearly seeing something coming down the pike. And a player like CoStar actually stands to gain a lot. They were the one stock pick who did well the day after. And they're actually in the midst of $1 billion push into residential. So I think we could see new players like that, not completely unfamiliar players, but we could absolutely see that race of residential products change.
Wow, the landscape of real estate is really not only being shaken up, but we are seeing the change, like the industry change. And, speaking about the MLS, and because they are such a big part of all of the exposure of listings with brokerages right now, as you just said, that, what happens if they take those listings away? Is there something that the MLS can do to protect the agents, that brokerage relationship? Is there something that the MLS can do more to serve the needs of the public while also protecting the interest of the agents and brokerages?
I think what we've seen is mostly just them really targeting the education and their relationships with members. I don't know that it's about a new offering. Clearly they're open to changing rules because they have to now. They're under the spotlight. So I wouldn't expect more changes, but I don't know what they can do to just shore up. I think it's a hard line that things have changed. And, that's the change they had to make, honestly, for survival. So I think for now, we kind of watch if anyone's outwardly questioning membership. We've already seen this from Redfin in the fall. But I think that was such an important example because they speak very strongly against NAR and, keeping a member and maintaining this overall system of MLSs. But within that statement, acknowledge that you really can't turn away in every market. You're turning away where you can afford it, where people can realistically still do business, but it's too big to ignore. So I think it's going to be a long trend to see how that shifts. I think it's going to fade, but yeah, I think it's so ingrained in the practices that people started their careers with that it's hard to say right away.
It is. And because there's so many changes, and like you were talking about, we still don't know what the financial fallout is going to be for brokerages. We don't know what that's going to look like across the board. And so it'll really be interesting to see, what the end result is and kind of who's left standing, I guess, after everything plays out. And you mentioned a little bit earlier about the impact on brokerage earnings and the impact that these lawsuits, settlements will have on brokerages. Do you have any insights on brokerages that were not a part of that original settlement? Are there things that we're missing as an industry that we should know information when it comes to those brokerage earnings and how that's going to impact agents and the industry?
I could say, as from covering earnings calls all last year, is that nobody was excited to have an extra cost burden on them. These deals are really coming out of necessity for survival. And I'd say it's not the time. I don't think there's ever a good time to be paying out $60 million to clean yourself up, but it's coming after a pretty tight year for the market. I think just about every player wasn't set to be profitable. We've already seen settlements from Keller Williams, Anywhere, and Compass. Compass and Anywhere struggled last year, so it's just going to add to the burden this year. And it's an interesting new layer, I would say, to already struggling with the market. And we'll see how it impacts at all kind of those streams of business, what they're investing in. And I'm always curious, what agents are noticing on the ground, whether that's technology resources, if it's downsizing, things like that. We don't expect anything major to land right away. There's, of course, infrastructure whenever you propose a settlement like this. But I'd say throughout this year, it'll be absolutely interesting how kind of they're maybe pulling from elsewhere to make up for these, how they're messaging this to investors. It could just degrade long-term trust, or it could be seen as a clean cut. And that kind of depends how you play it and how the rest of this year goes, unfortunately. So I'm biased, but stay tuned to our reporting on earnings reports, because it's going to get pretty colorful. But we've seen line items for these the past couple quarters. So they've been kind of shoring up legal resources. Unfortunately, lawsuits are expensive as soon as they happen and as soon as you're mentioned in them. So it's been ongoing, but this will be interesting to see how it actually could take a bite out of your bottom line.
Speaking of the money, 418 million is not typically what most people have in the bank. How do you see NAR? Like, they of course have a few years to kind of pay that money. Is that going to go to the agents? Like, where do you see that financial impact hitting of where they're going to come up with all this money?
Yeah, I mean, they appear to have the stores for it. They can pull certain threads if they need to. But yeah, they're absolutely relying on a structure to do that. And I think that's a reason that they had that $2 billion cutoff. So they know who could possibly afford to not get in on that and who else they had to cover. I'd say one large standout is actually still Home Services of America. That would be very interesting to watch. They're still involved in this lawsuit. And since NAR and Keller Williams have pulled out, that Anywhere could be on the hook for more than $5 billion. Excuse me, not Anywhere, Home Services of America. That's an important distinction to make. Home Services of America could be on the hook for more than $5 billion. It's worth repeating, which is an incredible amount of money and something that they have said could impact their bottom line. They're also owned by BHHS, of course. So they're pulling from plenty of stores, but it's taking a bite out of everyone. And unfortunately, these are still proposed settlements. So we have plenty to dig into as these get confirmed and more information comes out.
Wow. I don't think that those specifics are being talked about nearly enough. And I think both Carys and I are kind of like, whoa, I don't know if we've heard about that piece of it. How do you feel like that falling on Home Searches of America? Did I pronounce that right? Hopefully.
Oh, services. Yes, services. It's fine. I said
services. How do you feel like that's going to impact the industry?
It's it's going to limit your resources. It really is. You know, it's tapping into those other revenue streams. It's hopefully you're feeling strong after last year. But I can absolutely see a little bit more pain and reorganization for these bigger companies. It really depends, I think, how generous the deals are at the end. Like I said, we're talking about forecasted damages and proposed settlements. So that remains to be confirmed. But assuming those numbers, it's really going to be about working with the powers that be. And it's funny because I think the numbers are the most shocking, and that's kind of what sticks in my head. But it's really key to remember who's buying in on these rule changes and who's still outwardly valuing NAR membership, you know, touting the MLS versus new offerings, and who's going to say, like, maybe we can just do this on our own. Like, maybe we're more open to experimentation. I think that's where the real interesting parts are going to come out to play. But yeah, there's a lot of money coming.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. And I think that you have really helped clarify the impact that this has had on even the individuals. I don't think that it's discussed nearly enough. I'm sure Carys agrees about that. If NAR is named in a lawsuit, that means we all are.
Mhm.
And so all of a sudden it makes a really big picture come right back to you and say, you know, how am I involved, and what do I need to do to protect myself, protect my family, protect my business, and all of the above. So, in wrapping up, because I can't believe that we have already flown through almost 30 minutes. Are there any last thoughts, insights that you have for real estate professionals that are watching this and needing to know what are valuable resources that we can dive into, and making sure that we're consuming the right information and not just random surface information that is popping up all over the internet?
Sure. I think I've seen some fair at times criticism that, you know, everyone's paying this out as a bombshell. I would say this is significant if you don't like the word bombshell, but it's a big enough deal that it's worth keeping in touch with, you know, trusted reporting. I'm biased, of course. Us at The Real Deal are trying to cover every beat. It's nice that we have a little distance from the news, so we're trying to move into more market level coverage and see what messaging you're getting from local authorities. You know, how that actually impacts how the MLS plays into your market, things like that. So if I could say anything, you know, reach out with questions, feedback, tips. We're always open. But I would say paying attention to taking reporting from trusted sources like The Real Deal or other major financial sources. It's interesting to see how they're translating that for consumers. So maybe stepping outside of the broker hat for a little bit, seeing how they're, you know, talking to consumers about that, and then taking that in stride with the official messaging you're getting from, let's say, NAR. I think that's interesting to compare and to kind of keep a finger on. I think we're still far away from some answers, so keep that in mind. But I think just tracking how they're talking to your clients has been the most interesting, at least for me, from the industry side, not as a broker, but, you know, seeing these projections. It's worth keeping in mind, but probably not acting on right away. And then I imagine, yeah, just interacting on social media and breaking those down, I think would be interesting to see the ecosystem kind of take hold on to.
The word bombshell is very accurate for how pretty much all agents felt. They're like, what just happened?
Right.
Yeah.
Because this is such a significant thing that is going to change the industry. It's already changing. We're seeing people all in our women's of real estate group saying about how they're seeing these 0% commissions and they're not offering, or it's flat fee, and people are waiting, like actual sellers are waiting to sign until after July. So everything is going to be just moving. Chrissy and I are a big believer in, like, you adapt and you evolve as the world goes, as the industry moves. It's about being educated yourself and then educating your clients and consumers as well, because we've seen all over TikTok and YouTube and everything the hate against real estate professionals now. It's crazy.
Mhm.
But the more that we're able to keep everything, you know, calm, cool, collected, and just take everything with this change in our stride, the better, you know?
Right. And there's, I hate to keep repeating itself, just that there's so much to be seen. It's better to be prepared than surprised, right? So,
Yes.
we try to be over prepared and we're still tracking what's coming. Like I said, there's still lawsuits out there. There's still federal interest in how commissions are getting paid out. So, it's not time to tune out the news, unfortunately.
At
For sure.
all. And it sounds basic, but I'm so glad you said follow us and what we're reporting, because and we wanted you to say that, and we will be sharing all of your channels and making sure that people have access to all of the publications that you guys are putting out, because it really is based in factually what is going on. And like what Carys said, the dialogue and the energy that is actually happening on so many social channels is so negative. And often negativity comes from fear and lack of information. So we just really appreciate you taking time out of your day to help educate our audience, to expose them to the years worth of work that you guys have done. Even though it feels new to us, you guys have been in this for quite some time. And so we really appreciate that. We will make sure that everybody has your social links, and that we can stay updated on all the latest publications that you guys have.
Thank
So
you, Ellen. We appreciate you.
yes, Ellen, thank you so much for joining us. All right, you guys, we will see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.